Brilliant, thanks, Rotta. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon. Great to see so many people and lots of names I recognise as well, some I don't. Um, but yeah, this is the second of our two webinars. The two are exactly the same, so don't worry if you weren't there yesterday. If you were there yesterday, you're going to be getting exactly the same presentation. You might be able to spot the difference possibly on these things. But yeah, we're running two presentations. We've had lots of interest, which is really good. There's over 100 of you in today. We had almost 200 people yesterday. So that's almost, if we were to divide up people, almost one for every subscriber we've got at HESA. So absolutely fantastic to see you all join in. The main purpose of today is to talk about the requirements that we're setting out for the interim submission deadlines. The first one approaching us in May, the second one being in August. Hopefully to set some things straight, to offer some clarifications, to bust some myths, and where we've got space, and there will be some, is to answer some of your questions as well, and we'll talk about how you can get involved on that as well. But the big thing for me is March today. Somehow all of a sudden it was Christmas, some time elapsed, all of a sudden it's March. This is the month that the HDP, the HESA data platform, where we'll be collecting that new unified student record, that's where the data is going to be collected. That's opening at the end of this month, or by the end of this month at least. So it's already upon us, we're here. So depending on your point of view, we can almost see this as some kind of celebration, but my main task today is to actually talk through some of the practicalities of what's coming up. So as Dorota mentioned, just a few quick housekeeping mentions. So there are a lot of you in today. If you were a room full of people, it would be extremely intimidating. But because of that, we're going to have everyone on mute today. So unfortunately, you're only going to be hearing my voice. I'll try and keep things as entertaining as possible. But if you are having any issues, if you can raise your virtual hand, then one of the HESA team will be able to get back to you and just get in contact and see if there are any problems. So similarly, if there's anything else wrong. If you do need to leave, if you do need to take a break, we're only on until 3 today. So hopefully you've got all the kind of tea, coffee and other things that you need until then. But if you do need to pop away for any reason, absolutely do so. You know, this is a webinar, you're not on camera. If you need to pop away and answer the door or something, then obviously please do that. This is being recorded today, so if you do need to pop away, you won't miss anything. And you hopefully will be able to share this with colleagues as well. We're looking at getting this up on YouTube and having a YouTube link for that as well. One of the big parts of today is the interactivity elements. So although you're on mute, we can hear from you. So you'll see hopefully in the little webinar pane that you've got a question box. So you've got the option to put your questions to us about the interim deadlines and the HDP opening, what we're talking about today. So do stick your questions in there. I'm going to be stopping periodically throughout the presentation to mop up the questions that we do have. So do start putting those in as soon as you kind of hear something you want to talk about, and I'll stop periodically to answer those questions, and then we'll have a bit of a mop-up Q&A session at the end as well to pick up any questions we've not been able to get around to. But ultimately, we'll be sending the questions that we've been asked today and the answers around everyone who's attended as well. So even if your question doesn't get answered on the webinar today, we'll look at getting you a written answer and putting it into that Q&A that we put around afterwards as well. And what I'll be encouraging our teams to do as well is where we've got questions that maybe should be answered by some of the guidance we've got on the website, I'll make sure that we're trying to get this as up to date as possible as well. So do send those questions in, I'll be ably assisted. So yeah, welcome. We are opening soon, so depending on your proclivities or your current position on things, this may be an exciting time, this may be a scary time. It's the same for us at HESA to a certain extent. We're about to open a brand new system to the world. We're about to open it live and have hopefully everyone come in and successfully make their data submissions as well. So we're looking to open the HDP by the end of the month, so by the end of March. That would be that for those of you engaged with beta, it won't be on that beta side of things. That will be a live system in the same way that the data collection system is now. That will have its own link that we'll make sure that you can access. But similarly as well in terms of IDS roles, so a week or two ahead of opening, so by the end of March, a week or two ahead of that, so probably in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we'll be looking to send out IDS record contact roles to all of you who currently hold the student record contact and student alternative record contact roles. So we'll be sending automatically, I say automatically as in that they're the people we're picking, it will be a manual job for some of my colleagues. Those would be the people that we'd be hitting with those roles. So anyone who needs access to the HDP will need to make sure that their record contact is either giving them those roles once they've got their role, or they're able to go to their record contacts and request those roles. So one of the things I'll highlight a couple of times during this seminar is making sure that you know who your record contact is, and that your record contact that we hold for your student or student alternative record is up to date. Is it the right person? Because that's the person we're going to be emailing in a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks time, to give them this new role to get them into the HDP. The other roles that sit off that will be similar to the ones you've got now. So we'll have a submitter role for people who need to submit. So again, if you're a submitter in the current system and you need to be submitting in the new system, your record contact will need to reissue that role, that HDP submitter role for the student record. Similarly for IMS, for the queries, guest roles if needed, admin roles, as we do have in the current system as well. And what will be new, slightly different, is the OVT role. So again, you'll need an OVT role in the live IDS, the IDS that you use currently for all your student data submissions now. You'll need the OVT role from that once we go live to be able to actually get into the OVT. At the moment, that's sitting in beta, and the beta IDS, that's going to be deprecated, and everything will move into our live systems as well. Let's move on. So an agenda today. So I'll start off by just introducing my HESA colleagues who are on the call in a little bit, and those people who are assisting me very ably today. I'll give you some brief background as to why we're having an interim submission at all and the reasoning behind that. I'll then go into full detail on what the requirements and the schedule are for the May interim deadline submission. I'll then do the same for the August submission as well, just to kind of point out those differences between the two of them, because that's the next thing on the horizon after May. After I've kind of talked about all the things that we're demanding from you as providers, I can then talk about our side of the bargain in terms of the guidance and support we'll be able to offer you here at HESA. Then I'll sum up those next steps, what's going on next, what's around the horizon, what do I think you should be doing, what will we be doing, and then we'll mop up the Q&A as well at the end, so we'll try and get around to any questions that have been asked that I've not picked up, or questions that you've got later on. But I'm going to try and stop. I'll probably stop after that May submission slide for the first round of questions. But again, as I said, put those in as you go along, and my colleagues on the call will be able to collate those, put those together, and then put those to me when I get around to it as well. So do keep putting those in. Hopefully I'll answer some of those things as we go through. But if I do say something that you want some clarification on, absolutely by all means stick that in the into the question pane, please. Cool, just some brief introductions then. My name's Adam Van Koeverden. I am the head of operations and performance here at HESA, which is now part of JISC. My job is to look after the liaison and the training teams. So I sit above the managers in those teams, which is an absolute privilege to do. I'm being ably assisted today by colleagues who've also worked on the Data Futures programme. So we've got Helen, who's going to be my question master, picking up those questions and asking me, who's one of our project managers working on Data Futures. You'd have heard from Dorota earlier, who's our training manager here at HESA as well. Mel's here, who's a comms officer, who's also helped us loads with the comms that we've been sending out around Data Futures. And then also helping with some of those questions, and I might be picking her brains as well, is Lisa, who's one of our lead liaison analysts. And she was our lead analyst from liaison on the Data Futures project for last year as well. So she's got a lot of experience of working with providers and working on the project around Data Futures. So I'm very, very ably assisted today. So why are we here? Why are we running interim submissions? Well, the big headline is readiness, and it's not just in terms of your readiness, it's our readiness as well. So it's a big change. We're unifying the two student records. We've changed the model, we've changed the platform we're using, we've changed a lot of things going on in the background. So it's been, as you've probably seen, quite a big upheaval. For those of you who've been in the sector and been reporting to HESA for a number of years, you've seen that this has been years in the making. I think one of my children might possibly be younger than the Data Futures project, and she's just about to start junior school. It's a big change, so we want to make sure that we're ready, that everything works. We've gone through rigorous testing. We've had the alpha phase, we've had the beta phase, we've done internal UAT, user acceptor testing. Now it's a chance to go live and actually prove the concept and make sure that what we've got works. Along with that, we've got a responsibility as the official data collection body in the UK and in England specifically as the designated data body. We've got a responsibility to actually make sure that we can prove and assess that providers are ready for this as well. So part of that has been the readiness surveys we've been sending out, the guidance we've been able to offer, the conversations we've had, and we've had some really good, frank and productive conversations with both higher education providers and also the software providers as well. You know, we've been in touch with all of those sides for the last few years now, and this is part of that whole program in terms of making sure we can prove and assess readiness on your side, but also on our side as well. And so this deadline gives us a target to aim at, and means, like we've done in business as usual. So that second point, at the moment, we've got a return date, we've got things like a commit date, a final submission date. These are all staging deadlines to help us get you in the right place at the right time and give you the best chance to get your data in the best possible position ahead of that final drop dead rigid sign off deadline as well. So we don't just want to come at you with one final deadline and that's it, you've got no chance. This deadline gives you a chance for early engagement with the system, to test out your system, to test out our system, your processes, and make sure that actually you're really familiar with the system, that your data's in the right place at the best possible time ahead of when that deadline becomes statutory and very real as well. It gives you the chance to identify problems early, the problems with our system, with the rules, the problems with your data, with the way that your system's producing or storing or outputting the data. So the fact that we're making you all go through the system by the end of May means that there's a really good early first chance to identify any problems that either of us or your software providers haven't identified up till now. And what that means is that whatever those problems are, you've got the chance to get support and have conversations with HESA, with your regulator or your statutory customer, your funder, or with your software provider well ahead of that final deadline as well. So the idea is that let's prove that we're all ready. Let's see where we are. Let's do this because it's a staging deadline and it puts you in a good position to get to the end. And let's do this because it will help us identify any problems on any side and get some support and some plans in place. So the deadline itself, what is the deadline? What is it about? So as hopefully you've seen, the deadline that we're talking about is on Wednesday, the 31st of May this year. So we're just under 3 months away from that at the moment. The conditions of the deadline I've set out here underneath as well. So this has got to be using real student data. So this is a real deadline. This isn't just a test, this is a real deadline. So it's got to involve not dummy data or test data. This has got to be real student data, students who are falling into the coverage of your 22-23 student record, the students who you're going to be submitting to us later on in the year and signing off and sending off to your regulators and funders. Part of the deadline is that you've got to use the HESA data platform, the HDP, to make that upload. So if you're passing data through the OVT to test it, absolutely great, fantastic. I really do encourage you to get involved and use the OVT, but a good file submitted through the OVT won't count towards the deadline as we can't see this. It's got to be through the HDP because that's where we're collecting that data ultimately in the end. That's the real test of where we're going to be. It's got to be through the HESA data platform as well. In terms of passing validation, it's only got to pass, and I say only, but I mean it doesn't have to pass any of the later validation, any of the business rules or quality checks that we're doing. It's just the schema validation. That file's got to be well formed as per the schema. I've seen an email in the liaison box recently that asked, well, can you give us a list of the schema rules? The schema in itself is one big rule. It's got to conform to that schema. So the fields have got to be spelt in the same way that they're spelt there. They've got to be listed in the same order as they are in the schema there. The valid entries you use have to be the ones the schema limits you to. And in terms of mandatory fields, that's set by the schema as well. You can't get away without returning certain fields or that will break the schema. So that schema is one big rule. But that's the basics for your file. It's got to pass that schema validation. It's got to contain 50% of your students. So if your coverage, if you look at the coverage this year and you find that 2,000 students are falling into the coverage this year, in terms of meeting that minimum requirement, we'd be looking for you to submit 1,000 students. And we'll be doing checks compared to last year and the amount of instances you returned compared to engagements this year to see what 50% is. And there will be a rule, a quality rule within the system that you'll be able to see, where you can see what we're comparing this against and what we can see from you now, so you can see whether you've hit that 50% or not. It doesn't necessarily have to be complete data. It might be that you don't know something is unknown, you don't have that data in yet, or something hasn't been completed yet. Where that's the case, we'd encourage you to use unknown codes and fields where they're available, not to make something up or predict something. That feels risky to me. And similarly, if a field isn't isn't fully necessary to meet schema validation, then and you don't know it, then you don't have to return that field as well. But remember that earlier criterion is that it has to pass schema validation. So we're not expecting you to know everything and have everything for those 50% of students, but you've got to be giving us enough that it actually passes schema, that the fields are there enough to actually be compliant with the schema and to make sense there. But we understand if there are certain things you don't know yet because it's May. We talk about the file that we want to pass the deadline being sustainable. So the file that you upload to us, we want you to have created that in the same way that you'd be creating your final file and your serious proper file later on in the year. So if you're using a third-party software provider, we would expect you, in order to be able to say that this is a true test of readiness, to be using that solution to producing that in-house this file as well. Similarly, if you've got an in-house solution, that final tool where you've got small cohorts, or maybe you don't have a system that spits out that XML file we need, then that's exactly the solution we'd expect you to be using for the interim system. So the rule here is if you've got a particular method or solution that will be the one you're using to produce your ultimate file, that's what we want you to be using for the interim submission as well, so sustainable, so an actual test of your processes. There'll be an IMS query, just the one that pops out, that will ask you to confirm that all of these things are true and have happened, that you've met these criteria. So it might well be that you've met some of the criteria and you need to kind of give us some extra information or some contextual information about some of these, then that'd be the place to do it. But we'll be asking you, you know, how complete is this data? How sustainable was it? Is there any extra context you want to give? And we'll be expecting your record contact to be the one who answers on an IMS query, but it could well be that you've devolved that responsibility to whoever answers your queries in IMS normally as well. So this doesn't have to go up to the chief officer, the accountable officer, the principal, the VC. This can be with the record contact and the people working on the data. We just want confirmation from them of the quality and any issues that you've got in your data at this stage. We're not going to be doing any serious any quality analysis of this data. You might well hit some rules and look at it, but we just want some confirmation to you about the background and any kind of narrative around what you've done. If you want to do more than the minimum, if you want to give us more than 60% of your students, if you somehow have complete data, if you want to give us 100%, absolutely do it. But this is the minimum requirement. If you want to do more and you're in a position to do more, completely endorse that and completely encourage it. But in terms of a minimum, this is what we're looking for. This deadline isn't a statutory deadline. It doesn't form part of your statutory requirements with your statutory customers, with your funders and your regulators. But as we do with all of our staging deadlines, there will be reporting to the statutory customers around who's not made the deadline, or who's not been able to kind of do this as well. This is a business as usual process. And I would assume that the statutory customers will feed that into their general assessment of provider readiness as well. So there won't be any punishments for people missing the deadline, but it will help statutory customers to paint a picture of who's in which position, who's on the ball, who's ahead, or who's maybe having some problems. And that again in itself could feed into the conversations that the statutory customers might want to have with you or want us to have with you as well. And I would encourage, as I think hopefully we put the message out constantly so far from Liaison, is that if you think you've got any issues, that's the time to be telling us about it now rather than waiting till May. Things might come up that surprise you, and of course, that can't be helped. I've got every sympathy for that. But if you know that you've got some issues now about meeting these criteria, now would be a time to actually have that conversation with HESA and your statutory customer as well. And we can see if we can find some kind of solutions or some kind of middle ground to see what we can do. So part of this is about having that conversation, focusing your mind on trying to make sure that everything happens at the right time, but also giving you the chance to have those conversations early and have them often with us as well. So that's been a kind of barrage of information about the May deadline. So I'll just give a bit of a chance here to pause, and I will ask my colleague Helen to see if we've had any questions come in so far.
Hi Adam, yes, we have had some questions. Thank you very much for all those that have submitted them so far. You will have covered some of this already, Adam, but just for avoidance of doubt, let's just run through these couple of questions. So for the May submission, can you clarify if the entities containing data fields that would be unknown at this point, such as qualifications awarded, would have to be present?
So I think, for example, with qualifications awarded, I think that as an entity, and again, this would be off the top of my head, I think that entity is not a mandatory entity. That's one of those ones that's returned on a conditional basis. So I think that entity doesn't have to be returned to meet the schema. So where someone doesn't have a qualification awarded yet, you don't have to return it. So again, for any individual entity or field, go back to it and see whether it must be returned. It's got a minimum occurrence of 1, for example. It has to be returned, or is it a 0? If it's a 0, what are the criteria for it being a 0? Why wouldn't you return it? Is it because you don't return it if it's not relevant, if it's unknown? In that situation, don't return it. Or actually, is it only relevant for undergraduates or postgraduates or something like that? So make sure. So I would make sure you're kind of aware of the individual entities and the individual fields, and whether you've got to actually return an unknown code and return the field itself, or whether actually in the schema it says you don't need to return this entity if there's no data for it. And I think qualifications awarded off the top of my head is one of those entities where if you don't have anything to report in it, you don't return the entity.
Thank you. Can we have some clarity on the subject of 50% students to be returned in the May 23 interim submission? Is it 50% of the new students that started from 1st of August 22 intakes till May 23? Or is it 50% of all students, including new students from 1st of August 22 intakes until May 23, including those to be returned from legacy student alternative record?
Yeah, so it's the second one. So it's 50% of what the amount, 50% of students that would fall into the coverage of the 22-23 record. So that will be continuing students and new students, anyone who was eligible for the 22-23 return. What I would encourage is that I think to make it a more valuable test, I would encourage you to make that 50% as much of a mix as you can. So make sure there's new students and continuing students in there. Make sure maybe you've got leavers and dropouts in there. Make sure maybe you've got undergraduates and postgraduates in there. If you've got different cohorts, if you've got January starts and May starts, try and mix them up in there. I think the greater breadth of the kind of students you include in that 50%, I think the more valuable a test you make it for us, for you, and for your systems and processes, because then actually, if you leave your postgraduates and say, well, I'll return my 50% of all my students, but I'll only return undergraduates, when we get around to August or later on and you return your postgraduates, all of a sudden that might be even later as a time to kind of find problems with that data. That's not a requirement. Our requirement overall was 50% of your 22-23 eligible coverage students. We've not put any particular diktats around what kind of students they are, but my recommendation would be make sure that's a mix of different kinds of students.
Okay, thank you, Adam. To cover the 50% of students, is it counted or compared against my previous return on instance or instance period? In my previous return, I submit 1 instance per student, but 4 instance periods. I think for data futures, I won't be returning the equivalent of 4 instant periods. I'll just be submitting 1 instance per student. Just want to check really what the 50% check will be.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So obviously it's a rough check because it's not going to be that your data is going to look exactly the same every single year. You may well have gained a lot of students or lost a lot of students, but it gives us an idea at least in terms of the size of your provider. So if you made the student alternative return last year, we're looking at instances and we're going to compare them to engagements this year because they're pretty much analogous in terms of a student taking a course at your provider and a student taking a course at your provider this year. So yeah, so if you're either on the student or student alternative return last year, we're looking at the instances, the number of instances you submitted last year and comparing that to the number of engagements that will be submitted this year. And it might well be you need to talk to us that there's a reason why it's gone up or down, but we're still looking for 50%. So of those engagements that fall into this year's pot, we want 50%. We'll compare them to 50% of the instances last year.
Okay. If we have 3 intakes and we are expected to upload 50% of the file, I can upload continuing and September 22, but at this time we're still finalising January 23 students and obviously don't know how many people we will have for April 23.
Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely reasonable. So I think in that circumstance, it's going to be, you do what you can with the data that you've got and the students that you know. So yeah, so if the May submission comes before you've either collected the data for those students or you have the data for those students, then of course you can't return it. If for some reason that ducks you below 50%, which given the continuing students in the previous year, if they started mid-year, you'd hope not, then obviously have a conversation with us and let us know. But yeah, of course, we're not going to expect you to predict or make up data.
Okay. Is there a planned target date by which all quality rules should be available to providers?
I don't think there's a target date, but I think it's as soon as possible. So if you've submitted the HESA student return or the student alternative return before, there will always be tweaks and bugs and things that we're adding in. So I think by that standard, I'm relatively confident we'll probably have a higher percentage of the quality rules available um, when we go live than we kind of quite often do when we go live in the student alternative. Um, we would want absolutely everything needed for quality assurance available, ideally by the start of August, when we begin doing the proper quality assessing and things like that. But yeah, I think we're hopeful of getting, a lot of the rules are already in there. We're prioritizing from a conversation I've had earlier with people working on the project. Rules is what we're prioritizing first because we know that's what, that's the order of how things come in. So there's not necessarily a target date. One thing that will help providers, we'll do what we've done in previous collections by having a page linked to the coding manual where we put known issues and bugs and what's coming up in releases as well. So hopefully that'll give providers more of an idea of what's coming up and when in the system. But in terms of the rules, I think we're in a pretty good place actually.
Okay, and just one more question before we move on to the August requirements. How closely are you working with the software providers about the submissions? We have become aware of many issues that can't be resolved until work is completed by our software provider.
Extremely closely. You probably know this yourself, Helen, as well. So we've been attending software provider forums. We've been liaising directly with people at software providers, giving them access to the OVT, and having conversations with providers and software houses where we've had concerns around dates and deadlines and things. And some of the things we've been able to help with is being able to access that third party and liaise with software providers where maybe there's a misunderstanding between the provider and the software provider, and we're able to kind of intervene and help with that as well. So the first thing I would say is have a conversation with us if you've got a concern about your readiness, whether it's linked to you or your software provider. We'd want you to get in touch and to talk with us about it so we can make a note of that as well. And chances are we're probably already having a conversation with that software provider, but we'd want to know so we could either add that to our conversations or start a new conversation, please. So anything you think we need to know or don't know, please do get in touch and let us know. Brilliant. Is that what you had for now? Thanks, Helen.
That's for now. Thanks, Adam.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So the August submission, now that we've drilled down into the May submission, hopefully isn't too dissimilar. So this one will be submitted. We want this by Friday, the 18th of August, 2023. Again, as before, we want it to be real student data. Again, we want to submit it on the HESA data platform. And at this stage, we're still only looking at the requirement being passing schema validation. So by the time we get around to this this time, I'm hoping that we'll have, if not all, but the vast majority of the quality rules will be in there. But in terms of meeting our requirements at this stage, in terms of meeting that interim deadline, and again, you can go above and beyond and do something far better and way more advanced than that, which is brilliant. But at the moment, in terms of meeting that interim deadline, we're only looking to pass schema validation. But at this stage, we'd be looking at most of your students. So we said 90% for now. So again, comparing instances from last year to engagements this year, we're looking at almost a full file by this stage because we've ticked over the end of the academic year. We want 90% of your students here. There's a bit more of a demand in terms of the completeness of the data. Again, given that we've ticked over, we're going to be expecting far more complete data. Again, we're not saying complete data, but we're expecting it to be a lot less patchy than the data that we receive in May. We're expecting far more of these things to be known and to be available. Again, you'll be able to comment about that in the IMS query that we raise. Again, we'll raise that for comment from your record contact to confirm that you've met these criteria, or from whoever's working on your submission. And you'll be able to let us know kind of, where the gaps are or where you've not been able to, capture anything yet. And we can have a conversation about timescales there. Again, it's crucial, especially by this stage, that we're looking at a sustainable solution. We're expecting your software solution or whatever you're using to produce the data here to be up and running and be able to produce this by August. So again, we're expecting it to be sustainable, to be the same as what you're using for your overall submission. As always, and as per that last question, absolutely please do either note it in your readiness survey or get in touch with us directly if you want to have a conversation with us about your software provider. Have that conversation with your software provider too. Make sure that kind of, it could be some miscommunication, it might be some confusion on expectations. Hopefully they'll be able to confirm and give you timescales about certain functionality or about any patches that are coming out. So make sure you're having those conversations with them and with us. That would be really helpful. Again, the August deadline isn't a statutory one. But again, we will be letting our statutory customers know, your funders, your regulators know, to keep them abreast of provider readiness and give them some context. And for me, I think the August deadline, you would hope would give us an even closer, because we're very close to that October main deadline, picture of who's ready and what the issues are as well. So you can imagine we're kind of focusing in as the time goes on there. So I've hopefully set out quite clearly what our expectations and our needs are. We're also doing what we can to provide you with guidance and with support, and hopefully you're aware of most of these things and you've been in contact with our liaison team, or you've been engaging with our training team. We've got lots of help there if you've got any concerns or issues, or you're not understanding something, or you need to just clarify something. We've got many routes that you can come through to make sure you're sorting it out. Our coding manual, I would say, is always the first place to go to. We've got a huge amount of technical guidance on there, along with guidance around the fields, around the submission, the systems, help guides. We've got lots of examples, and we've set out all sorts of ways where we've been fed back to over the last couple of years that we think we can help you in terms of setting out our guidance of what we want, how we want it, and when we want it as well. I would particularly direct you towards the schedule pages, and if these aren't already tattooed on your arm or kind of lasered into your eyelids already, make sure you get those into your diary, and make sure that the processes that are going on at your end are leading you to a place where you're able to meet those different deadlines in the schedule. But that last one, that deadline in October, that sign-off deadline, that's the real deal statutory deadline, and all the things we're doing before that is trying to help you get into the best possible position to meet that deadline beforehand, and that's why we're talking about interim deadlines today. As part of your subscriptions, we've got plenty of free e-learning on our website as well. Our training team have put together lots of really useful e-learning guides. Some of these are, I think most of these are CPD accredited as well. Absolutely a must, I think, for those of you using the system for the first time. If you're new to the student record, or you just need a refresher of what's going on, I really would recommend those actually as well. So those are there. Do ask us if you're having trouble finding them, but they're there on our support pages. To supplement these, or if you prefer being in a room with other people, for the first time, I think in over 3 years, we've got a series of in-person seminars, and these come at a very timely juncture as we're leading up into our first year of reporting through the data futures model. We are running some introductory seminars around the country during March, and there'll also be an online version. And then later on, from June, we've got some intermediate seminars. So these aren't just looking at the basics of data futures, these are taking it a step forward. So this will be for colleagues who are familiar or a bit more comfortable with the model, and this will look more into some complex scenarios and examples as well. But we're actively asking the people, the colleagues in the sector who are participating in those seminars to let us know some of their examples and their scenarios, so we can go into those in greater depth. And then, as always, we've got our liaison team. They're on hand Monday to Friday during office hours, on the phone, on the email, there to support or to ask questions, or just to let you know where something is and point you in the right direction as well. So hopefully we've tried to offer you many different methods and types of support to get you through the next few months. And as always, and I mean, from my experience of working with providers over the last decade or so, communication is always really frank and open and honest, which I really do value. So even if you're just slightly worried, or you've got a worst case scenario to run through, give us a shout, absolutely let us know, and we can kind of talk through what we think the next steps are as well. if you're having problems or you think that there may be problems, I think the earlier you can have those conversations, the better, because it means that you can plan and you can get the best advice from us, and you can get the most time to implement it. Like I said earlier, sometimes things do happen at the last minute, and that can't be helped. But if we can help it, not leaving it to the last minute might make it a smoother and easier experience, hopefully. Helen, what are we doing in terms of questions? How are we going?
Yeah, we've got a few questions to put to you, Adam, if that was a good
Let's go.
time. Okay, so August, your guidance on the August 23 interim submission says the file will need to pass schema and the file will be subject to full quality assurance processes. However, it's not expected that all outstanding issues will be resolved. Can you tell us what the tolerances will be for the August submission, please?
So it's less about tolerances in terms of the fact that as soon as we get to August, we're turning on our automated quality assurance mechanisms. So if you remember previous student submissions, what happened is you got through our automated validation, and then you got to the stage where once you got through that, you'd commit your data, you'd wait in a queue for a couple of days, and then it would be checked by our analysts, who then pump out Minerva, or in latter days IMS queries. The HDP is far more sophisticated, and what it can do is once you've got a file up, it can automatically pump out those quality assurance queries. So any file that you're putting out from August onwards will be subject to those queries automatically anyway. What we're not expecting at that stage is for you to necessarily be answering all of those queries straight away. So in terms of the deadline's not about you answering those queries, but what we're saying is that when you're putting your file up to meet that deadline, it will be subject to those queries. Again, you might be in a really good position, and actually you're ready to start making answers to those, or making changes and answering them. Great, the earlier you can engage with anything, the better. But that's just to kind of say that by that stage, the system will be in a position where it will be pumping out those queries, but those queries themselves and answering them don't form part of that deadline.
Thank you. Looking for a bit of clarity, please, Adam, around the, you mentioned a commit deadline at the top of the webinar. Was this a mistake on your part? Is there a commit deadline?
I mentioned the commit deadline with, and I've probably muddied the water here, just with reference to the past. So earlier on, I was talking about how we've got interim deadlines here, and that's analogous to how we had interim deadlines in the past. So the return deadline and the commit deadline in the student return and student alternative return were interim deadlines. And what I'm saying is now that we've moved away from having specific return and commit deadlines, but for this first year at the very least, we've got these interim deadlines to help guide you towards that final deadline. In the same way, previously, the commit deadline was an interim deadline guiding you towards the sign-off deadline. So yeah, commit is no more, but the concept of interim deadlines persists.
Great, thank you. How much migrated data from the legacy return is expected to be included by providers? Can explicit guidance be made available?
I'm going to put my hands up and say I don't quite understand the question, I'm afraid. In terms of the data that we're expecting to see here, we're looking for 50% of the students that fall into your 22-23 coverage. Those students, I would hope, but they don't have to, would include continuing students. And the data that you're returning about continuing students should be up-to-date data. So I think we state in quite a few places that we expect you to resurvey students each year, for example. So I'm not sure that we would necessarily want you to be submitting blindly any migrated data. So in terms of your continuing students, we're going to want those in your file, and certainly will do by the end of the submission period. But in terms of whether that data is the migrated data or not, will depend on whether the students have been resurveyed and whether that data has been updated. I don't know, Lisa, I don't know if you've been close to some of this work or whether you've interpreted that differently to me.
We are going to pull across some migrated data from the 21051 and 21054, but it won't necessarily be all the data that everybody needs to complete the return. So I think you've answered it correctly. That data should be.
Some of it's about validation, isn't it?
Yeah. So you could use that data as a basis, but it won't give you the full suite of data you need to do the 22056.
Yeah, so we've got no requirements around migrated data. We may well be using the migrated data to validate against. So previously we've done continuity checks. So, if one of your students looks markedly different from last year, we may well raise a query about it because it looks different compared to your migrated data. but there's no requirements around that. It might be correct that your students look different compared to last year and you've got a good reason for it. So there are no requirements about the use of migrated data. It's up to you to make what use you'll find useful of it, but we're expecting your data this year to be the data for 22-23 and be up to date and to be about what's going on there. We can let you know that we're using that data as the continuity validation, and that's how we're going to form the basis, but we've not put any requirement on providers to actually use that data. It's up to them to use it how they will.
Okay, even though the May submission only has to pass schema, will there be any guidance? Sorry, will there be any business rule checking for guidance only?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I mentioned it briefly earlier that when by the time we open with the HDP at the end of March, the business rules will be in there. And if you've been using the OVT, you'll notice that there are quality rules just generally in there already. So in exactly the same way, when you upload a file to the HDP, if it passes through schema, I mean, fantastic, thumbs up. It will be submitted to the quality rules that we've got in there. And like I said, we do have much of the quality rules in there as of go live. So if you want to get on with doing further checks and moving your file further forward than requirements for the interim deadline, fantastic, great. Yep. So there will be other things in there. It won't just be schema. There'll be other bits and bobs in there as well, including quite a few of the quality rules.
Okay, will you be revising the data quality report to include both the summary and the individual data issues in the same file for downloading, like we had for HESA student?
Sounds like a very technical question to me. Again, Lisa, I don't know if there's something you've seen before, you know, it's in the backlog.
Sorry, I've missed the questions. Can you repeat that, Helen?
Yeah, so will you be revising the data quality report to include both the summary and the individual data issues in the same file for downloading, like we had for HESA student?
Presumably, is that an OVT question?
Yeah, I'm not sure that you can download it all in one go at the moment. You can download individual quality issues that have triggered, but you don't get it all in one go. So you can see it all on screen in one go, but you have to go into each rule to download all the details. I think that's correct. But if you email into Liaison, I can confirm for you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. What are the consequences of not being able to submit a complete file by statutory deadline?
So is that in terms of the one statutory deadline we've got is that sign-off deadline, and it depends where you are, to be perfectly honest. So you will have different requirements in England than you'll have in maybe Scotland or Northern Ireland or in Wales as well. So in England at the moment, you're regulated by the Office for Students, and any statutory deadlines they give you form part of their requirements, their requirements for registration. So you would be breaking one of those requirements with your regulator. So it's more of a question for your statutory customer or for your regulator, to be perfectly honest. You know, some of the requirements with your funders, for example, may be that they're not able to make funding assessments for your institution in time, or you might miss out in terms of data publications or in terms of being entered into league tables. If you think about all of the different uses of HESA data and the uses that your data is put to, missing the deadline may put those uses at risk ultimately. But what you would need to do is have a conversation with those users of the data to ultimately find out what's going on. You know, the OFS, if you're in England, have a whole long list of sanctions they could subject you to if you break their requirements of registration. So it's well worth looking into those. It's a real higher level risk, and it's something that you want to make sure that you've had a conversation with your senior management or your compliance people about, because it's something that's not just about data collection. It's something that could feed into funding and regulation at the highest institutional level. So again, from HESA is not a statutory body. HESA can't punish you. HESA have no stick. We've got very few carrots. But what may happen is that your regulators or your funders, you may have issues with them, and I would implore you to kind of look into those if you need to know them.
Can we update the reported STU load for the May submission in August, or is it best to not report it at the time and only report the final amount?
That's one I'm happy to leave to providers, actually. I think whichever you will find either least confusing or easiest for your system. So say, for example, if your system can easily spit out a STU load in May that applies to May, and it will update it will update in August, then that's great. Then feel free to do that. If you want to give us the August predicted one because that's the way your system works, then fine. Then do it that way. But again, you've got to make sure that you're returning the field in a way that meets the schema validation. So it might be with StuLoad, I think you probably can't ignore that field. I think you probably have to return it. I would double check the schema on that one. But again, what will make it easier for you in August to do in May in a way? I wouldn't want you to put something in May that's going to make it far more difficult for yourself in August. That's going to mean you've got to either manually update something or runs the risk of you sending us that out of date May information again in August, if that makes sense. So so it might be one to kind of consider at your end in terms of we can take either as long as it meets the schema. What would be easiest for you to manage between May, August and October? What will make it less confusing for you or make it easier in the system?
Okay. All right, just to confirm, the 50% and the 90% thresholds for the interim submissions will be based on last year's number of instances. It will help us plan accordingly if we can get some clarity on that. As someone else has mentioned, we won't have all enrolments by the May submission, so the 50% of students this year is actually an unknown quantity.
Yeah, exactly that. So spot on in terms of the statement around instances, that's absolutely completely correct. In terms of that 50%, I would then say, yeah, I would look at instances last year, and if you've not got any intelligence, yourself about what's coming, if you're looking to recruit the same amount of students this year and you're not looking to recruit fewer or far more, then I would use that 50% of instances from last year as a guide as well. But yeah, absolutely that. If you can't predict the future, and I would hope, because you have to make a HESI submission, you've got an idea of what you're trying to recruit, at least you'll have an idea of what 50% will look like vaguely. Things may go, against expectations, of course they might, but at least you'll have a bit of a kind of ballpark figure, hopefully. But yeah, absolutely, it's about instances.
Okay, thanks, Adam. So we've got one final question for you. How will we commit the files to the interim submissions now the commit function is defunct? We will likely be uploading multiple files regularly at this time as we no longer have an alternative offline validation kit.
So yeah, I mean, there is the OVT to use as well, remember, and I would encourage, it's on my screen here, I would encourage providers to use that if they want to, especially if they want to upload files away from the prying eyes of HESA. But yeah, we'll be able to, there's a history of all the transactions uploaded to the system as there is with the current data collection system, and Liaison will be able to see a report of the different transactions that people have uploaded and how many instances are in there and how that's done against the rule that we've got, comparing it to last year. So if you don't have to commit anything, there's no commit button in this anymore. So you can upload your file. If you upload a file before that date that meets that criteria, that's absolutely it. What will kind of mark you as finished is the return of that IMS query. So we're looking to raise that IMS query as soon after go live as we can in March, so it's there for you straight away. And once you've done what you need to do in terms of, you've uploaded the file you think that kind of meets it, or you're there, or you're done, you can confirm that in that IMS query and send it back to Liaison. And you can keep carrying on files. There's no point where we need you to stop uploading files and you've done your 50% and you need to stop. If you want to carry on testing files or uploading other things, keep doing it, because we can see that you've uploaded files that are bigger than 50%. And we'll be able to see from when you return that IMS query back to us that you're happy, that you're finished, and you've uploaded a file that meets those criteria.
Just had another couple sneak in the last minute.
Yeah.
Will we be told if we've met the 50% threshold?
So you'll be able to, and I made the same mistake as yesterday, so there will be a quality rule. So we've talked about how there are going to be quality rules. One of the quality rules that's in there will be specifically comparing the amount of engagements compared to the amount of instances you're loading. I think it should even give you a percentage. So what you'll be able to do is that, and we'll identify it and tell you what the name of the rule is going forward, but you'll be able to go into the quality rules, find that rule, and it will tell you whether you've met that 50% threshold or not.
And a related question, will HESA contact us if we haven't met the 50% for an explanation?
No, so what will happen is the same as with all deadlines. So you've got from now until the deadline to tell us if you think you've got issues meeting the deadline. So you've got the chance to speak to us up until then. You've got the IMS query if you want to tell us that you've done your best, but there's a reason why you couldn't upload the 50%. So there's a chance to add the context. And then what we will do is, after the deadline's passed, we'll get in contact with everyone who's not met the deadline and to tell them they've not met the deadline. So that again would be a point where you can kind of have a conversation with us around why you've not been able to do that, or add some additional context. there's quite a few opportunities to talk to us and let us know if you think you're not able to meet it.
Thanks, Adam. That's all the questions now. We've got a few which are more specific to providers, which we'll respond to offline. But
Cool. So there's only I think a couple more slides yet next. So next steps. What do I think the priorities are? So obviously you'll have your own priorities at your end, and you'll know far more about the HESA student return in your provider than I will ever know. But for me, it's making sure that your record contact's up to date. So one of the first things that we're going to do to get the system open and live is to go out in 2 or 3 weeks to your current student record contact or your student alternative record contact and go, here is your invite for new student record contact role. So a priority is making sure or thinking or confirming to yourself maybe that your record contact is up to date. Is that the right person? Is that the person that needs to be the student record contact? And if not, you've got 2 or 3 weeks now to get that updated and get that changed. So that's about getting in contact with the liaison team. The record contact can be changed by either the current record contact themselves or by your principal accountable officer if they're not available or they've left or they're not around. Once we've issued those roles and we've got the right record contact in place, the next priority would be making sure that the right people in your provider, in your institution, have the correct IDS roles. Do the people who need submitter access have the submitter role? Do the people who need IMS access have that IMS role? And that's the point where you need to make sure that your record contact has either divvied those out, or you need to go to your record contact and ask them to do so. You can request that. The HDP is obviously not open yet. We've still got just under a month. So if you're raring to go and to get files up, the OVT is there right now. All of our student record contacts were sent an OVT role so that they could pass out to their colleagues to get them in. It still sits in our beta system, but that's available to everyone, regardless of whether they participated in beta or not. So again, it's not as if you're stuck being able to test files before the HDP is open. The OVT has been open for several months now to allow you to do that. And everyone was given access to do so. If you don't have access, or you don't know who your record contact is, or your record contact maybe didn't act at the time, again, get in touch with HESA and we can resend that role out. And then again, that can be given out to colleagues to get into the OVT and test their files. Again, this will give you a preview of those schema rules that you'll be encountering. And if you get past those quality rules that we've talked about as well, that take you to that next stage. The next thing that will happen after that is at our end. We will open the HDP and we will tell you about it. It will happen by the end of the month. It feels like a really big milestone. We've talked about data futures, we've spec'd data futures, we've tested data futures, and now here it is, the student record. It's going to be live and open in there. And hopefully, as I've emphasised throughout the whole webinar, it's about staying in touch. This webinar is part of a whole suite of activity that we've put on and will continue to put on in terms of trying to keep engaged, to keep you informed, to keep you hopefully reassured that we're there to answer any questions, to keep you up to date with what's going on, and to give you all the information that we can at the appropriate time as well. But if you need to know anything more, if you want to tell us something about what's going on with you or about what's going on with your software, if you need any further clarification on some of the things I've said today, get in touch with us. Let us know. Come to our training seminars. Give liaison an email or give them a call. So that's it. So it's quite whistle stop. Hopefully we've talked about why we're having interim submissions. We've talked about the benefits of doing that. We've talked in huge depth, hopefully in good depth, hopefully from your point of view, about what those interim submissions mean and what the criteria are. And then we've talked about what the next practical steps are going to be. Within a month's time, we'll have issued out those IDS roles. We'd have put the HDP active, and you've got the ability in every single institution to go in there, upload a file and start testing your file against those rules and seeing how it matches up. And we'll head towards that May deadline. As always, do keep in touch. I think it's always, the earlier the better if you ask something, but absolutely, it's sometimes it's never too late on some things as well. So yeah, so don't shy away. We're always, the main reason HESA's here is that we were set up by providers to be that kind of buffer between providers and the outside world in terms of helping get your data in shape and helping get in order. And our liaison, our training teams exist, our project team exists to actually make sure that we're getting you in the best possible position to make those statutory returns as well. So do use us where you can. We got any more questions pop in, Helen?
We have. We've got a few more to run through before the end. So
cool.
Quick question on IDS. Can multiple people have the same IDS role?
So it depends on what the role is. So the record contact has always just got to be one person. There can only be one record contact at the provider, but the record contact can issue multiple admin roles, for example. So admin roles have pretty much the same access as the record contact. They can grant submitter roles, IMS roles, guest roles, OVT roles. In terms of those submitter, IMS roles, guest roles, and OVT roles, that can almost be as many as you need. I think we do set some limits on, but I think they're quite high. I think there's something like 25 in some cases. And if there were a real reason, although we've not seen it yet in the last few years, to have more than 25 of a particular access role, then that's a conversation you can have with us. So yes, you can have multiple submitters, and we would actively encourage it. I think in terms of best practice, in terms of HESA data collections, what you would want is, I think you would want at least one admin. So you've got someone who can cover in the event of the record contact not being available, at least one admin. And I think for the other roles that you need for access, like submitter, IMS, OVT, for example, I would recommend having, regardless of your size of institution, the minimum number I would say would be 2 for each of those things, because you wouldn't want to end up in a situation where somebody leaves or somebody's ill or somebody wins the lottery and they're the only person in your entire institution that can do something. The submission of this data is a statutory requirement, and that's a statutory requirement at an institutional level. It shouldn't be anyone's personal requirement. It's not Joe or Joan Bloggs' requirement to make this data return. It's the university of whoever's requirement to make this return. So you've got to make sure that there's an institutional responsibility to have some resilience there, and to make sure that should something unforeseen happen, can someone else get in? Can someone else do something?
A question about, as we move into 23-24, are there likely to be interim deadlines for that period as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a live question at the moment at this end. So we had a meeting with statutory customers last week where this came up as something for them to consider. So from a personal point of view, and we'll obviously see how it goes this year, all of our other data collections and our student collections since the year dot have worked on having interim deadlines to get providers into gear, because otherwise we don't need to see anything from you until quite late on. So personally, I think they're very useful to have in terms of just being able to weed out issues early. What I'm doing at the moment is I'm asking our statutory customers to consider what they want to do, and we'll try and settle that issue as soon as possible to give you some notice. So if I were a betting man, I'd say it's quite likely that we would want to retain some interim deadlines for future years. And I suspect, given the nature of the data future system, obviously we'll see how it runs this year, they would look similar to this year, but we'll see how it goes. It could be that we go down to having one interim deadline, or we change the criteria slightly. But yeah, I would like there to be.
If we're able to make the 90% threshold by May, would we still need to make an August submission?
No, absolutely. I mean, the earlier you meet a deadline, the better. Absolutely. You're not gonna. It's not that you have to make a 90% submission by that date in August. It's on that date in August. It's that you've done it by then. So yeah. So if you've met that criteria way earlier, we'll be able to pick that up in the reporting that we do, and you'll be able to put that in the IMS query when we open it up as well. So yeah. So absolutely no problem with doing that. There's no need to kind of redo any work that you've done, or almost put up a dummy file to show that you've done it again. Yeah. If you meet either of those deadlines early on, that'll count.
Got a question that says, would the file discussed above be made available on HDP? I'm assuming this is referring to the migrated data file.
I think the answer is yes, but again, I'll defer to Lisa. I think that is being made available in the HDP.
Yeah,
isn't it?
so the migrated data from the 21051 and the 21054 will go into the HDP when it opens at the end of March. So there'll be a file at the front page there you'll be able to download. We've done the same in beta and made it available. So yes, that will be there.
Okay, couple more questions then just before we wrap up. Is the OVT in the beta HDP system?
So yeah, it is at the moment. That's why we're hosting it, because we've not got a live system live at the moment. So for now, the OVT is in the beta system, but it's available for everyone to use. We sent out invites to all of our record contacts to have access to that. And then that's through the beta IDS, of course, because it's all on the beta system, and that's where it resides at the moment. But when we go live and when we move everything over to our live system, that will no longer be through the beta system, beta HTTP, that will no longer be using beta IDS. we'll be moving onto our live system using live IDS roles on the live HTTP.
Just going back to the question we asked about whether you could submit 90% by May, somebody said presumably not all the data would be available by then, so it wouldn't be a valid test.
Well, yeah, exactly. It kind of all depends. So remember that when you're answering that IMS query later on in the year towards August, we're asking you to confirm whether you've met those criteria. So, you know, is it a sustainable file? How complete is the data? So exactly that. So again, it depends on your own internal processes. You know, when is that data going to be more complete by? When is it going to be ready? So so I don't know what's going on in your institution in May necessarily, but I won't rule out some providers, especially smaller providers, might be in a position to be ready and more complete than some of the larger providers earlier on in the year. So that will depend on you, and we're relying on you to inform us of this through that IMS query. Doesn't have to be a big essay, doesn't have to be a big deep dive, but just giving us an idea of kind of if there is incompleteness, where does it sit?
Thank you, Adam. We're at 3 o'clock now.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for your engagement. Some really good questions there. And again, like I said, great to see so many of you on the call. I hope this has helped to answer some of those more general questions, give you some more clarification, hopefully reassurance about the May and the August deadlines. I found it a really useful exercise. If you do want to know more information, this has kind of brought up other questions. Like I said, get in contact with us in the liaison team. I can't recommend the e-learning and the seminars that our training team will be putting on enough. Please do look into whether those will be useful for you. I think they will be. And keep in touch. Thank you very much, and good luck with all your preparations for Data Futures. And I'm looking forward to the HTTP going live. Thank you all very much.